A significant portion of a developer's job is to debug code to figure out what's going wrong and fix it. Being efficient at debugging is a huge benefit to any developer, regardless of your skill level. One of the key features of debugging is knowing how to use breakpoints. Now, you probably know how to add and remove breakpoints, but there's so much more to learn. In this video, we're going to go over trace points, temporary breakpoints, conditional breakpoints, dependent breakpoints, breakpoint groups, function breakpoints, and much more. Now, this video is one of hundreds of videos on this channel that focuses on C# and C# related topics. I would encourage you to check out the playlists as well, where you'll find multiple full courses for free. I would also encourage you to check out the Dev Questions series specifically. It answers all the questions you might have about being a software developer that don't involve writing code. For instance, how do you create a portfolio? Or how do you work with a difficult boss? And so much more. Finally, if you're looking to upgrade your skills, check out my full courses on imtimcorey.com. There you can set a great foundation with one of the master courses, or dive deep into a topic relevant to modern development like SQL or Blazor web apps. So let's jump into advanced breakpoints in Visual Studio. Now here I've written a small little console application just to get us started. And the point here is not to write good code. This is meaningless code really. But what the point is to show off how breakpoints work. So let's start with what's a breakpoint. Well, a breakpoint, you probably already know, you put your cursor over here on the left gutter and you just click somewhere and you can put a breakpoint in. And when you run the application will pause at that point and you can inspect variables and do many other things. That's a breakpoint. But there's more to breakpoints than just putting a dot in the left column and having it hit. For example, we can use trace points. So if we right click on the gutter, let's do it right here is fine. And we're going to insert a trace point. Notice you have conditional breakpoints, temporary breakpoints, dependent breakpoints, as well as trace points. We're going to go over all of these, so don't worry, we're not going to skip over them, but we're going to start with a trace point. So I click trace point. Notice you get the square on its side that indicates a trace point. So a trace point has actions. So notice here it says actions, and it says show a message in the output window. It's supposed to say window, but it gets cut off because my font is too large. So if you hover over this I right here, it will give you all the different things you can put in this window that might pull out information you want. So these are keywords. So for example, you can get the hit count, which is how many times has been hit. You can get the tick, which is the milliseconds that have elapsed since the system started. You can get the thread name, the call stack, the caller, whatever else. But we're going to just grab the value of I and print it out to the output window. Notice it goes to the output window. So we can say the value of I is, and then in curly braces, we just put I. So if you put curly braces, whatever the variable is you put inside those curly braces will get printed out as the value of that variable. All right, so that's a trace point. Notice it says continue code execution, which means that unlike normal breakpoints, it's not going to break the action. It's not going to stop the action, pause it there. It's going to keep running, which means that this code is going to run. It's not going to stop when it hits this trace point. It's just going to output to the output window. So now we're saying the value of I is. Okay, we're going to hit close. And notice down here, we do have print info and it's saying we just hit and the value. So that's different than the trace point message. Just want to kind of point that out because our application is done running. We just ran through, we reached the maximum value of 100. This is the end. And if we come over here to our output window right here, notice in the output window that we have, all the normal output stuff, and we start seeing the value of I is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it counts all the way up until it gets to 99. So we see all those values. So they print out all those values on the output window. That's what a trace point does, which this allows you to not stop 100 times to say, yes, keep going, yes, keep going, yes, keep going, if you just want to see what the values are as you go. So that's super useful for certain scenarios. And I'm not going to give you all the scenarios you could use this for. You're going to have to use your imagination. What I'm trying to do is give you the tools in the toolbox, then go, oh, I have a tool to do this, and use it when it makes sense. So a trace point allows you to print to the output window and allows you to optionally not stop. So we could say, don't continue execution. Notice it's now a breakpoint, but it's still going to print to the output window as well. Okay. So a trace point is when we continue code execution. It doesn't actually stop the flow of the application. Okay. So now let's look at the next, which is a temporary. So you can right click on this again. Let's just delete the breakpoint and recreate it. We're going to create a temporary breakpoint. Notice it's got the little clock icon inside the breakpoint. Okay. And if we hover over, you can go to settings, or if you right click on it, you can go to, modify any of these things. I like to hover over, you can go to settings, that gives you this blue window. Okay. So it says disable breakpoint once hit. Okay. So if we run this, and it's going to print out I is 0. We've paused the application. We hit continue. Notice that we're done. The application is now complete. It's run all the way through to the end. We didn't hit it again. And in fact, if you run this application again, I just ran it again and it ran through. It didn't even break once. Why? Because this trace point is no longer enabled. If I enable it, notice it changes the icon. So that trace point, that temporary breakpoint, not trace point, the temporary breakpoint gets disabled after it's been hit once in one execution. Then it's done. It disables itself. So this might be useful if you want to put it somewhere and say, hey, I just want to know this gets hit at some point. And then I don't want to keep pausing the application. So just hit once, let me know you've hit once, and then we're going to disable you. And not delete it, just disabled. So you can also right click on a breakpoint, by the way, and say disable breakpoint. And notice it goes, it's got some kind of just an outline instead of the actual filled in breakpoint. So that means it's not going to get hit at all. Okay, so that is a temporary breakpoint. Now let's do a conditional breakpoint. Let's right click again. We're going to say insert conditional breakpoint. Notice the plus inside. So the condition, so conditional expression or a hit count or a filter. So if we say a hit count, we can say, after you've been hit 5 times, or a filter where, this information is true. We can add conditions and so on. But we're going to start with a conditional expression, just do a conditional expression, and we're not going to add more conditions. We could, whoops. So, but we're going to start with I is greater than 10. So once you've surpassed 10 for our number, I want you to break. All right. So, and now we could add a condition and add a second thing, and the hit count is something. Notice it took the conditional expression away. Okay. So we're just going to do the conditional expression. That's it. We're going to say I is greater than 10. Now I is our variable. So with this, notice a little plus icon now indicating that this is a conditional breakpoint. So if I run this and it pauses, but notice that the output window says we just hit 0, 1 through 10, but now it's saying, okay, pause because I is greater than 10. Now it's 11 right now, so you hit continue and continue and continue because each time now it's 14 and so on because it's breaking every time I is greater than 10, which that may not be what you want. And so what we can do is change our condition. Whoops, I'm going to use the settings instead. We're going to change a condition where we say maybe you want to say I equals 10. That might be what you want to do. Or you can say, I is greater than 10 and less than whatever. But okay, there's our I equals 10. Now, when we run this, I is 10. And if we continue, it continues the application and we're done. So that's how you do a conditional breakpoint. So let's clear that again or delete it. And we're going to do a dependent breakpoint. So I'm going to put a breakpoint down. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. We're going to come back and do another conditional. So I'll put a breakpoint, go to settings, and I'm going to say condition where I is greater than 10. If I do it right, I is greater than 10. There we go. And we're going to say that. So now this breakpoint is going to be hit if I is greater than 10. Because maybe we're debugging, why does this loop, go larger than we thought it should? We thought it should end at 10, which of course, that's because we put I is less than 100, not 10. But with that, maybe we want to figure out, what's going on in here. Or let's do it at the end, because wherever. But what we're going to do instead is, let's delete that. We're going to insert a dependent breakpoint. And we say, only enable when the following breakpoint is hit. And we choose program.cs line 9 character 2, which that's line 9 is right there. That's the print info, which is a conditional breakpoint. Okay, so we hit close. Notice it's kind of hard to see, but it's there we go. It's the outline, not the filled in one like this one is. Okay, that's because by default right now it's disabled. So that's okay because we're going to enable it if this upper breakpoint gets hit. So if we run this, notice that now, if we zoom in, now it's enabled because that breakpoint was hit. Okay, so the top breakpoint was hit, therefore the bottom breakpoint was just enabled. So now we run through, we go, wow, we got to hit this 100 times. I didn't think that one through. I'm going to redo this setting because it needs to be equal because I always hit it like a bunch of times. So there we go. Let's run this again. Let's disable, or let's go back to there and say disable because it was enabled once. But let's hit again. Now it's enabled again. We hit continue. We hit that breakpoint. Okay. We can continue from there. And now it's disabled again because it's conditional on a different breakpoint being met. So this might be something where, if you have something wonky going on, like maybe you're debugging multi-threaded code, which, yes, that's a messy proposition, right? So you might be running a method on multiple threads, but you only want to capture it when one thread is going off the rails in some way. So you could put a conditional breakpoint that says, hey, if you've got, some bad info, well, then I want to enable the breakpoints on that other method. So you can kind of link these breakpoints up together, which is kind of cool. All right. So that's how you do multiple breakpoints that rely on each other. But now let's talk about working with multiple breakpoints. And in fact, the breakpoint window. So if we go to debug, Windows, breakpoints, or Control-Alt-B, you'll notice that down here, we have multiple breakpoints listed. This is a list of all of our breakpoints. And in fact, if you want, you can use this little icon here that says export all breakpoints that match this current search criteria, which there is no search criteria, so it exports all of them. But you can export these breakpoints as an XML file. Okay, so I can hit, demo, and then I can delete this. I can use this other icon that says import breakpoints from file, and I can bring them right back. So if you wanted to, save and restore your breakpoints, you could do that. That allows you to kind of set up a debugging environment and then say, you know what, I'm going to, clear it all for now, or maybe I want to load it into the application later so I can save that as a file and then bring it back in when I want to, or share that breakpoint set with somebody else and say, hey, here's my breakpoints that I used. Check this out. Now, there's also the ability to label your breakpoints. Notice right here we have labels. You can right-click on a breakpoint and say Edit Labels, and you can add labels. For example, you can say Demo. Okay, so this is a demo, and you can sort by, is it demo or something else? And you can come over here and you can say Edit Labels. I want this to be a demo as well, and it's now they're both demo. So you can actually come back over here and say I want Edit Labels again, and say this is actually test as well. All right. So this one's demo and test. This other one's just demo. And you can, again, sort by those as well. So you can also do filtering and so many other things based upon these labels. There's also, though, the ability to group breakpoints. Now let's add a few more breakpoints in here just because it makes more sense to have multiple. So now we have 4 breakpoints, but there's different types of breakpoints, right? Maybe there's breakpoints for I'm debugging, something significant in my code that's broken, or I am just going through my code naturally to test different things. So maybe there's 2 different sets. Well, what we could do is say, let's add a breakpoint group, new breakpoint group. Let's call this things are broke. Okay, and now we have a things are broke group. And this is, we can right click and say add a breakpoint group, not things are broke, but a new breakpoint group where I call this normal debugging. And now we have breakpoint groups. Cool thing is, notice that the normal debugging group, I can uncheck this box right here. And now those breakpoints are disabled. The normal debugging is disabled. The things that are broke, disabled. I can re-enable it. Of course, then it kind of messes with some stuff, but I can disable and re-enable as a group if I want to. So we can group breakpoints together and we can treat them in a similar manner. We can say, hey, turn on, turn off. But then also we can say, you know what, the normal debugging, that's our default group. So if I add a new breakpoint right now, like right here, okay, so I should pin this. There we go. So now notice, let's take it off and put it back on. Notice that it's not in a group right now. So it's not part of either of these groups. It's just on its own. Well, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want, by default, breakpoints to go into a certain group. Not a problem. Let's right click on normal debugging and say we want to set as default breakpoint group. So now when I add a new breakpoint, it goes into the normal debugging group. We can also right click on the group and say that we want to unset as default breakpoint group if we no longer want that to happen. So that's a lot about breakpoints. There's one more that I wanted to show that's a little funky. But let's actually, you know what? No, we're going to do this. We're going to turn off our breakpoint groups so that all our breakpoints are turned off. But what we're going to do is say new function breakpoint. And this one is one that I have not found a ton of use for, but there are circumstances where it might be beneficial. So a function breakpoint is where you put the function name in. And notice that, sorry, it scrolls. That's how this box works because of my font size. So break on any function matching the specified function name that is identified while debugging. So the function name is going to be print info, which is that method right there. In language of C#, notice we now have, it went into normal debugging by default, but we now have one breakpoint that's called print info. It doesn't have a line number, it doesn't have a character number, it doesn't have a file number. That's because wherever it finds a method called print info, it's going to break. So if we run this application, well, we're going to pause at that top line right here because this is the print info breakpoint. Because it found this method, we called it, therefore it's going to break there. Now, why would that be beneficial? Well, that might be beneficial if you had a method that had a bunch of overloads, maybe even overloads in different files, where you don't want to track down and find all the different variants of that. Or maybe you have a file called, like, I don't know, load data that you call, whether you're loading from Postgres or SQL or Mongo, or you have all these different things, but you're just calling this one load data method, one name called load data, even though you're in different, based upon the interface, you're using different implementations. So in that case, you could put a breakpoint essentially on every load data method, regardless of what database it's using, because you just said function breakpoint. Okay, so that's a possibility. It's not necessarily something I use a lot. In fact, I don't think I've ever used it, but it's there if you really want it. Okay, so that is the kind of the bonus round there. of things you can do with function breakpoints. Okay. Now, there is something else that is of very limited use. I'm going to show you. I'm not going to even actually wire it up, but if I were to put a breakpoint here is fine. And oh, yep, sorry. There we go. So now we've got this I equals 0 right now. And I want to say, hey, watch this value. Whenever it changes, I want you to break. So you can right click on it in the autos window and say break when value changed. Now, in this case, it won't work. Okay. It says, hey, no, you can't do that because it can't be found in the managed heap and cannot be tracked. So it really should be, I believe, a property inside of a class instance that you're tracking. And there's severe limitations on how many of these you can do. So you can only do it once you're debugging, and you can only, if you're on a 64-bit machine, like an Intel 64-bit, then you are allowed, I believe, 4 of these, tracking 4 of these. If you're on an ARM 64 chip, then I believe you can only track 2. And if you're on just an ARM chip, not a 64-bit ARM, then you can only track 1. And that's a limitation of the operating system, which I don't understand. But just note that's a possibility, but it's such a narrow use case that you probably won't use it that often. It's a cool feature. I really like it. I wish we could do more of it. But just note that there's some significant limitations around the break when value changes on this. So with that, that's breakpoints. There's tons to do with breakpoints, and learning how to use them effectively is really important because, again, the faster you are at debugging, the faster you are at getting your job done. And the better you will be at tracking down new problems, which is a significant part of any developer's job. So hopefully this has been helpful. Let me know down in the comments if I missed any breakpoint goodness, or if you want to cover something else like this. But I thought this would be useful for kind of upgrading your skills to the next level. All right, thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.